If you have spent any time in the strange corners of the internet, you have heard the word archons. It gets thrown around in conspiracy videos, in discussions of ancient aliens, in occult forums, in half-understood references to the Gnostics. And in almost every case, it is used wrongly, vaguely, as a spooky label for some undefined cosmic evil. The word has been stripped of its actual meaning and turned into a piece of mystical decoration. But the archons are not vague. They are not a modern invention. They are one of the most precisely described concepts in all of ancient religious thought, laid out in detail in real texts written nearly 2,000 years ago, of texts that were buried in the Egyptian desert and only recovered in the last century. The people who wrote about the archons knew exactly what they meant by them. They gave them names. They described their appearance, their origin, their ranks, their territory, and their purpose. They built an entire, coherent, disturbing system around them. And it is worth pausing on how we even know any of this, because the story of the sources is almost as strange as the archons themselves. For most of history, the Gnostics were known almost entirely through the writings of their enemies. The early church fathers who attacked them, quoted them selectively, and mocked their beliefs in order to refute them. We had the prosecution's case, but almost none of the actual Gnostic writings in their own words. Then, in 1945, near a town called Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a farmer digging for fertile soil at the base of a cliff struck a large sealed clay jar buried in the ground. Inside were 13 leather-bound papyrus books, ancient codices containing more than 50 texts, and among them were the actual Gnostic scriptures themselves, in their own words, hidden away and buried, most likely by monks around 1600 years ago when such books were being ordered destroyed as heretical. Someone chose to bury them rather than burn them, and the desert preserved them. The detailed profile of the archons in this video comes largely from these recovered texts, from writings with names like the Apocryphon of John, the hypostasis of the archons, which literally means the reality of the rulers, and on the origin of the world. These are the primary sources, the archons described by the people who actually believed in them, rescued from the sand after 16 centuries of silence. So let us do something that almost never gets done. Let us set aside all the internet noise and go back to the actual sources and build a real, accurate profile of the archons, as the ancient Gnostics actually described them. Think of this as a field guide to the rulers, assembled from the primary evidence. We are going to cover what the word actually means, where they came from, what they look like, how they are organized, what they do to human beings, and finally, what the ancients said you could actually do about them. By the end, you will understand the archons better than almost anyone who casually uses the word, and you may find that the accurate version is far more unsettling than the vague one. Let us start with the most basic thing, the name itself, because the name is the first clue and almost everyone misses it. The word archon is Greek, and it is not originally a supernatural or occult term at all. It is a completely ordinary political and administrative word. In the ancient Greek world, an archon was a ruler, a magistrate, a government official. The city of Athens was governed by archons, elected officials who held specific offices and administered the affairs of the city. The word simply means ruler, or one who governs, one who holds authority. It is the same root found in words like monarchy, rule by one, and hierarchy, a ranked order of rule. This matters enormously because it tells you immediately how the Gnostics thought about these beings. They did not think of them primarily as demons in the sense of chaotic evil spirits. They thought of them as officials, as authorities, as a government. The archons are, in the Gnostic vision, the administration of the cosmos, the bureaucracy of the material world, the officials who hold the offices of power over physical reality. When you understand that the very word means governing official, the entire Gnostic picture clicks into place. This is not a story about random malevolent spirits. It is a story about a system of rulership, a cosmic administration, a hierarchy of powers who govern the prison and process its inmates. The archons are the wardens and the clerks of the material world. Now that we know what the word means, let us establish where they came from, because their origin story is essential to understanding their nature, and it is genuinely strange. To understand the origin of the archons, you have to understand the basic Gnostic picture of reality, which this channel has explored before, but which we can lay out cleanly here. At the very top of the Gnostic cosmos is the true ultimate source, an utterly transcendent and perfect divine reality, often called the Father, or the Depth, or simply the One, beyond all names and beyond all comprehension. From this perfect source, a whole realm of divine beings emanates, a fullness of light called the Pleroma, populated by pairs of divine beings who exist in perfect harmony. This is the true home, the realm of light, the divine fullness. And then something goes wrong. According to the most detailed Gnostic accounts, one of the divine beings in the pleroma, a feminine figure named Sophia, whose name means wisdom, acts out of turn. In some versions, she desires to create or to know the ultimate source on her own, without her divine partner, without permission, and this act of imbalance produces a consequence she did not intend. She brings forth something, an offspring, produced outside the proper order, and this offspring is deformed, incomplete, ignorant. Ashamed of what she has produced, Sophia casts it away from the realm of light, into the lower regions, where it becomes the first ruler, the chief archon. And this being, this first archon, has a name. The Gnostic texts call him Yaldabaoth. He is also called Socklus, which means fool, and Samael, which is interpreted as the blind god. And here's the crucial part of his character. Yaldabaoth is born into a place cut off from the realm of light above him. He cannot see it. He does not know it exists. He looks around at the lower regions and sees only himself and the chaotic matter around him, and he draws the natural but catastrophic conclusion. He believes he is the only God. He believes he is the supreme and only power in existence, because he cannot perceive the true fullness of light above him from which his own mother came. And in the most striking passage in all of this literature, Yaldabaoth declares his supremacy out loud. He proclaims, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." And the Gnostic texts frame this declaration not as a statement of truth, but as the ultimate expression of his blindness and arrogance, the boast of a lower, ignorant being who genuinely does not know that a whole realm of light exists above him. And here is where it becomes truly provocative, because that declaration, "I am God, and there is no other beside me," is a direct quotation of statements made by the God of Israel in the book of Isaiah. The Gnostics were making an unmistakable and audacious claim. They were identifying Yaldabaoth, the blind and arrogant chief archon, with the creator God of the Hebrew Scriptures. In their reading, the God who created the material world and demanded worship and declared himself the only God was not the true, ultimate source at all, but this lower, ignorant ruler convinced of a supremacy he did not actually possess. Now, from this chief archon, the rest of the archons come into being. Yaldabaoth, in his role as a creator figure, brings forth other rulers beneath him, and the texts describe him creating a whole host of them, generating a full administration of lower powers to help him govern the material realm he is fashioning. And this is where the profile gets vivid, because the ancient texts do not leave the archons as abstractions, they describe them. So let us build the physical and structural profile, because the descriptions are far more specific and far stranger than the vague modern usage would ever suggest. First, their appearance. The chief archon, Yaldabaoth, is described in genuinely monstrous terms. One of the primary texts describes him as having the form of a lion-faced serpent, with eyes like flashing bolts of lightning, a being of fire and darkness. He is a hybrid, a fusion of beast and reptile, leonine and serpentine at once, a figure of raw power and terror rather than beauty. This is a deliberate and meaningful image. The lion signifies raw, dominating power and predatory strength, the will to rule and devour. The serpent signifies the earthbound, the material, the coiling energy of the lower world. Fused together, they make a being that is pure ruling force wedded to pure materiality. A king of the lower world with no light in him at all, only power and appetite and the will to dominate. And the detail of the lightning bolt eyes conveys a terrible, restless, scanning vigilance, the gaze of a warden always watching, which is fitting for a being whose very name in the tradition, the Watcher-Ruler, is bound up with surveillance and control. Everything about the described form of Yaldabaoth communicates the same thing, a power that rules without wisdom, that dominates without light, that watches without understanding. The perfect embodiment of authority divorced from the true source it does not even know exists above it. The lower archons under him are often described with animal heads and bestial features, a bestiary of hybrid powers. In some texts, they are given specific animal faces: the face of a lion, the face of a donkey, the face of a hyena, the face of a serpent, the face of a dragon, the face of an ape, each ruler bearing a monstrous, animalistic countenance. These are not beautiful angels. They are described as grotesque, bestial, hybrid rulers, images of a distorted and fallen power. Second, their number and organization, because the Gnostics were obsessed with the structure. The archons are frequently organized around the number 7 and sometimes 12. The 7 chief archons are associated with the 7 visible celestial spheres, the 7 wandering lights the ancients tracked across the sky, the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. Each archon is assigned to one of these spheres, given a domain, a rank, and a name. The text lists these names, strange and guttural names, one for each of the seven, each ruling his own sphere. The Apocryphon of John actually enumerates them, giving each of the seven a name and often a paired quality or a bestial face, describing how the chief archon set them over the seven heavens in imitation of the true order above, a counterfeit of the divine fullness he could not perceive. Some of the names echo divine titles from the Hebrew scriptures in distorted forms, which was part of the Gnostic point, that these rulers had draped themselves in the names and authority of God while being nothing of the kind. Each name, each rank, each assigned sphere was part of a deliberate architecture, a bureaucracy of confinement, a chain of command reaching from the chief archon down through his subordinate rulers to the machinery of fate that governed human life below. Above and around them in some systems are further rulers associated with the 12 signs of the zodiac, and below them still, swarms of lesser powers and authorities, demons and officers of the lower air, filling out the full administration of the material realm, so that the entire structure from the highest sphere to the surface of the earth was staffed, ranked, and governed, a complete cosmic government of confinement. The whole visible heavens in this vision are not empty space but an administrative structure, a set of concentric spheres, each one governed by a ruling archon, layered between the trapped human soul below and the true light far above. And here is something most people who use the word archon have no idea about. The word does not only appear in the buried Gnostic texts, it appears in the New Testament itself, in the letters of Paul in the original Greek. When Paul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians that none of the rulers of this age understood the hidden wisdom of God, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory, the word he uses for rulers is archontes, the plural of archon, the rulers of this age. When Paul writes to the Ephesians that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, he is describing a hierarchy of ruling spiritual powers stationed in the heavenly realms, governing the present age, hostile to the divine plan. And when he calls the adversary the god of this age who has blinded the minds of unbelievers, and the ruler of the power of the air, he is using language that sits astonishingly close to the Gnostic picture of the archons, ruling powers of the lower heavens who keep humanity in blindness. Now, mainstream interpreters read Paul's rulers of this age as either earthly political authorities, like Pilate and the Roman and Jewish leaders who condemned Jesus, or as hostile spiritual powers, or as both at once. And the Gnostic reading is certainly more radical and more systematic than anything Paul spells out, but the vocabulary is undeniably shared. The concept of ruling powers, archons who govern this present age, who are hostile to the true divine wisdom, who operate in the heavenly places, and who kept the saving truth hidden, is not confined to the buried heretical texts. Its vocabulary and its basic shape are sitting right there in the foundational letters of the New Testament. The Gnostics did not invent the archons out of nothing. They took a concept that was already present in Paul, in the Jewish apocalyptic traditions of hostile heavenly powers, in the wider religious imagination of the age, and they developed it into the most systematic and detailed form it ever took. The rulers were already in the air the early Christians breathed. The Gnostics simply named them, ranked them, and drew their portrait in full. Sit with what that means because it transforms how you look at the night sky. To the Gnostic, the ordered cosmos of the astronomers, the beautiful clockwork of planets moving through the zodiac, was not a thing of beauty. It was the architecture of a prison. Each planetary sphere was a level of confinement ruled by an archon, and the human soul, to escape, would have to pass through all of them, past every ruler, to reach the freedom of the light beyond. The very regularity of the heavens, which other ancient people found reassuring, the Gnostics found ominous. It was the machinery of fate, the gears of the prison, the ranks of the wardens arranged in the sky. Now we come to the most important part of the profile, the part that explains why any of this matters. What do the archons actually do? What is their purpose? What is their relationship to us? The archons have one overriding purpose, and it is this: to keep humanity trapped, to keep the divine spark asleep, ignorant, and confined within the material world they rule. Here is the deep logic of the Gnostic system. Human beings in this vision are not simply the creations of the archons. Human beings contain something the archons do not have, and something the archons fear. When Yaldabaoth and his fellow archons fashioned the first human being, molding a body out of matter, that body was inert, lifeless, unable to rise. But a spark of the true divine light from the realm above, from Sophia, was placed into the human being, secretly, in a way the archons did not fully control or understand, and so the human being, uniquely, contains a fragment of the true light, a spark of the ultimate source, buried within a material body fashioned by the lower rulers. Humanity is a hybrid of divine light and archonic clay, and the light within humanity is actually superior to the archons themselves, because it comes from the true source that they cannot even perceive. And this recasts the entire story of the Garden of Eden in a way that is genuinely jarring the first time you encounter it, because the Gnostic texts retell Genesis with the archons as the central players, and the roles are reversed from what you would expect. In these accounts, when the archons realized that the human being they had made contained a spark of light greater than their own, they became afraid, and they set out to control and suppress that spark. The command not to eat from the tree of knowledge, in this reading, was not the loving guidance of a benevolent creator. It was the archons attempting to keep humanity ignorant, to prevent the human beings from gaining the knowledge that would awaken the spark and reveal to them their true nature and origin. The tree of knowledge, in the Gnostic reading, was the very thing that could wake humanity up, and the ruler who forbade it was trying to keep humanity asleep. And the serpent, in some of these texts, is recast accordingly. Rather than a deceiver, the serpent becomes, in certain Gnostic accounts, an agent of the true light, sent or inspired to urge humanity toward the knowledge the archons were trying to withhold. When the serpent tells the woman that eating from the tree will not bring death but will open her eyes so that she becomes like the divine, knowing good and evil, the Gnostic reading takes this as simply true. As the serpent, revealing the liberating knowledge the archon creator had lied to keep hidden, the whole moral polarity of the garden story is inverted. The one who forbids knowledge is the jailer, and the one who reveals it is the liberator. Whatever one makes of such a radical rereading, it follows with a terrible logic from the basic premise that the maker of this world was not the highest god, but a lower ruler with an interest in keeping his creatures confined and unaware. The texts go further still, in passages that are genuinely dark, describing the archons attempting to defile and dominate the first humans, to overpower the light within them through violence and through the manipulation of desire, trying to trap the spark ever more deeply in the mechanisms of the body and of reproduction, so that it would be scattered, divided, and kept endlessly bound within the cycle of material life. The picture is of rulers who will use every possible means, deception, prohibition, desire, force, forgetfulness, to keep the divine light from waking up and escaping their domain. It is a genuinely disturbing vision, and it is presented in these ancient texts with complete seriousness. This is why the archons fear and resent humanity, and why their entire project is one of control. They know, or they sense, that human beings carry within them a spark greater than the archons possess, a fragment of the very light that stands above them. And so their purpose is to keep that spark from waking up, from remembering what it is, from recognizing its true origin and rising back to the realm of light. The archons rule the material world as a system designed to keep humanity distracted, ignorant, asleep, and confined. Every mechanism of the prison serves this purpose, and the texts are specific about the tools the archons use to keep humanity asleep. One of their chief instruments is fate, Heimarmene, the relentless mechanism of astrological destiny governed by the planetary spheres, which binds human beings to cycles of compulsion and circumstance, keeping them reacting, bound, unfree. The Apocryphon of John describes the chief archon creating fate deliberately, as a bond, a chain laid upon humanity, so that people would be governed by the movements of the spheres and locked into a determined course, driven by forces above them, never realizing they were being steered. Fate, in this vision, is not a neutral cosmic law. It is a tool of control, an invisible harness laid over human life by the rulers to keep it running in the tracks they laid down, so that a person lives out a life of reaction and compulsion, pushed and pulled by circumstance, mistaking the whole time their bondage for freedom and their programming for choice. Another is what the texts call the counterfeit spirit, a kind of false animating principle. The archons place within human beings to imitate and suppress the true divine spark, filling people with lower impulses, appetites, fears, and distractions that drown out the voice of the light within. The archons rule through desire, through fear, through forgetfulness, through the endless churn of material need and material craving that keeps human attention locked downward on the world of matter, never looking up toward the light from which the spark came. There is a detail in one of the primary texts that captures this with chilling precision. The Apocryphon of John describes the archons deliberating over how to keep the human being under control and deciding to cast a kind of forgetfulness over him, a trance, a numbness. The text uses the image of the archons bringing over Adam a stupor, a sleep, and it makes a pointed comment that this was not the sleep of the body, but a deadening of the senses. a forgetfulness poured over the soul so that it would not perceive its own true condition. And in a striking aside, the text says this is what the prophet meant when he spoke of God causing a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, reinterpreting that famous moment in Genesis as the archons drugging humanity into forgetfulness. Whatever you make of that rereading, notice the psychological sophistication of it. The rulers keep humanity confined not by chaining the body, but by dimming the awareness, by pouring a kind of sleep over the mind so that it does not wake up to what it is. The prison is a prison of consciousness, maintained by a deliberate forgetting. Notice how psychological this is. The Gnostic archons do not primarily control humanity through dramatic supernatural terror. They control humanity through the ordinary texture of unawakened life itself, through appetite, distraction, fear, compulsion, the sense of being driven by forces one does not understand, the fog of forgetfulness that keeps a person from ever asking what they truly are. The prison is not made of bars. It is made of the very stuff of ordinary, unreflective, distracted human existence. The archons keep you asleep by keeping you busy, anxious, hungry, and afraid, and forgetful, so that you never stop and remember that there is a light inside you that came from somewhere infinitely higher than the world these rulers govern. And this is precisely why the Gnostic path to salvation is what it is. The escape from the archons is not through force, and it is not through ritual obedience to the powers that rule this world. It is through Gnosis, knowledge, the awakening of the spark to the memory of its own true origin. The moment a person truly knows, truly remembers, that they carry within them a fragment of the ultimate light, a fragment superior to the archons and their entire prison, in that moment the archons begin to lose their grip. Awareness itself is the escape. Waking up is the liberation. To remember what you are is to begin to rise past the rulers who depend on your forgetting. But the rising itself, according to the text, is not easy, and this brings us to the final part of the profile, the part that connects directly to the Gnostic vision of death. Because when the awakened soul departs the body at death and begins its ascent back toward the realm of light, it must pass upward through the planetary spheres, past each of the ruling archons stationed at each level. And the archons do not let souls pass freely. They challenge the ascending soul. They demand to know who it is and where it thinks it is going. They act as toll collectors, as border guards, as checkpoints, trying to stop the soul, to turn it back, to keep it confined within their domain. And to pass them, the soul must possess the knowledge, the names and the words and the understanding, that prove it belongs above, that prove it is a child of the light and not subject to the rulers of the lower world. This is why Gnosis was understood as literally saving knowledge. It was the very thing that allowed the soul to get past the archons and rise beyond the spheres to the freedom of the light. So now we can assemble the complete profile, the accurate one, the one drawn from the actual ancient sources rather than from internet rumor. The archons are the rulers, a word meaning governing officials, the administration of the material cosmos. They originated from a cosmic error, the fall of Sophia, and the birth of the blind, arrogant chief archon Yaldabaoth, who believed himself the only god and whom the Gnostics boldly identified with the creator of the Hebrew scriptures. They are described as monstrous, bestial, hybrid beings, lion-faced and serpentine, organized in ranks of 7 and 12, assigned to the planetary spheres, turning the ordered heavens into the architecture of a prison. Their purpose is to keep humanity trapped, asleep, and ignorant, because humanity secretly contains a spark of the true light that is superior to the archons themselves. They rule through fate, through the counterfeit spirit, through appetite and fear and distraction and forgetfulness. And they can be escaped only through Gnosis, the awakening of the spark to the knowledge of its own origin, which allows the soul to rise past the rulers and return to the realm of light. That is what the archons actually are. Not a vague label for cosmic evil, but a precise, coherent, and genuinely disturbing account of a cosmos ruled by ignorant powers who keep humanity confined in a prison of forgetfulness, unaware of the light it carries within. It is worth asking why this 2,000-year-old idea has come roaring back in the modern imagination, why the word archon has escaped the dusty pages of ancient texts and started appearing everywhere from philosophy to internet forums. And the reason, when you think about it, is uncomfortable. It is because the core description has started to feel eerily applicable to modern life in a way it perhaps never did before. Consider the actual mechanisms the ancient texts assigned to the archons, keeping human beings perpetually distracted, keeping them anxious and afraid, keeping them locked in cycles of appetite and craving that are never satisfied, keeping their attention pulled endlessly downward, onto the material, onto the immediate, never lifting toward anything higher, keeping them, above all, forgetful, too busy, and too stimulated ever to stop and ask what they truly are. Now look at the systems that increasingly shape modern human attention. The engineered feeds designed to capture and hold the eyes, the endless streams of stimulation calibrated to keep people scrolling, the manufactured anxieties and manufactured desires, the deliberate cultivation of distraction as a business model, the way an entire economy has been built around capturing and never releasing human attention. This channel has explored elsewhere how uncomfortably well the ancient description of the archons maps onto these very real modern systems of attention capture and desire manufacture. And that is precisely why the idea will not die. Whether or not there are literal lion-faced rulers on planetary thrones, the ancients described with startling precision the experience of a consciousness kept asleep by forces that profit from its sleep, and that description has only become more recognizable with time, not less. The archons, whatever they ultimately are, describe the condition, and the condition is one an enormous number of people quietly recognize in their own lives. And here is the thought worth ending on, the thing that has kept this ancient idea alive and unsettling for 2,000 years. Strip away the specific mythological imagery, the lion faces and the strange names in the planetary spheres, and ask what the archons actually describe at their core. They describe the experience of being a conscious being that senses it is meant for something higher, trapped in a condition of distraction, compulsion, fear, and forgetfulness, ruled by forces it did not choose and often cannot even see, kept perpetually too busy and too asleep to remember what it truly is. Whether you take the archons as literal cosmic rulers or as a mythological picture of the very real forces that keep human awareness confined and asleep, the ancient description has an uncomfortable way of ringing true. The Gnostics looked at ordinary human life, at how thoroughly people are kept distracted, anxious, hungry, and forgetful, never quite waking up to any larger truth about themselves, and they said, someone benefits from this. Someone is keeping you asleep, and that question, whoever or whatever the archons finally are, is the one they left ringing across 2,000 years, waiting for anyone awake enough to hear it and ask who, exactly, benefits from making sure you never truly wake up.